Hello everyone, I'm here to introduce you to our sewing machines in the classroom. For my returning students, please use this as review. For my new students this fall, this is how I plan on showing you how these machines work, especially if you're a remote student. There's a few different items or features, if you will, on these sewing machines. This video is just telling you about those features and how to turn the machine on. First, we have a couple of things. This here is the foot pedal. The foot pedal is placed on the floor when you are sewing. Please place it gently on the floor and don't let it drop. They are expensive, and it is one of the most common repairs on our classroom sewing machines is the foot pedal, so please gently place it on the floor. Next, you'll find the on-off switch right above the power source. So the power source is here, and the on-off switch is just above it. Once you turn it on, you're going to wait the 3 seconds. What you saw it do there was to self-calibrate. That's important so that the needle comes into the center of where you're sewing, which is where you need it to be. The next thing to remind you about is the little computer screen here. Remember that this number 1 represents the different type of stitch that you're using. So the number 1 is where the machine turns on. That is your basic straight stitch. The machine also turns on with the presser foot number 1. So this is the picture of the presser foot, which is this item down here that helps the fabric go underneath the presser foot with the feed dog to sew your basic seams. The number 1 that is here is related to the number 1 that's engraved on the presser foot, which is, if you take a look, it's right to the left, the number 1. If you're using another stitch besides number 1, this number on the machine right there may change. If you are stitching a blind hem, which is stitch number 5, it requires a number 5 presser foot. So please always make sure that the number that's engraved on the presser foot matches the number next to the little presser foot picture on the computer screen. Alright, this right here on the right hand side of the screen talks about stitch length. The machine turns on at a 2 stitch length. I ask all my students to bump it up to a 3. These machines are much friendlier with beginner sewers at a stitch length 3 than at a stitch length 2. Many times while we're sewing, we'll make a few errors, go a little to the left, a little to the right, and have to rip out that seam. It's just easier to do so when the stitch length is a 3. This button here in the middle changes the position of the needle. So when I hit this button, the needle, you can hear it and see it, is moving to the right. Now it's moving to the left. We don't need to mess with that unless you are doing some sort of appliquing or adding cording or chains or something like that to a design. So for now, don't mess with the needle position. The top is the width of a zigzag. So eventually in class we will get to the zigzag stitch, which is a number 2. When you hit the number 2, you'll see it here, say number 2, still a presser foot 1, and the machine changes your length and your width for a basic zigzag stitch. You can change the width. You'll see the bar come across the top. You can change the width of that zigzag stitch to be wide or narrow, and you can also change the stitch length by hitting this. You can make the stitches longer or shorter. Okay, I'm going to go back to number 1 because we're going to be straight stitching today. That does not have a width, which is normal. And then the stitch length, we want it to say a 3. Okay? Alright, so those are the basic reminders of what the machine are. A couple more I want to cover before I go on to the next video, which is how to thread it. Up here on top, we have our bobbin drum, the bobbin pin, and the bobbin winder indicator button. We have that tension clasp back here, so when I thread it, you'll hear me refer to the silver finger or the metal finger where you put your thread behind. That's in the back. On the side, over here, is the take-up lever. One of the largest issues with an improperly threaded sewing machine is that the thread does not get into the take-up lever. So it must get into that take-up lever in order for it to have even stitches as well as the tension that you're looking for a well-sewn seam. Okay, so make sure that when we go through the threading, and I'll bring it up in the next video, that the thread is through the eye of the take-up lever. Okay. If you have a machine with this function right here, this is something that you would use if there wasn't a foot pedal. So for most of you, you don't need to worry about this, and in fact in the classroom it's only on 4 machines, so you don't have to worry about that unless there's a reason that you can't use the foot pedal. The last thing I want to talk to you about are these 3 buttons. This one here refers to, on the screen, that's a picture of a needle. When you have the arrow pointing to the ceiling, that means the needle ends in the up position after you get done sewing. So when I'm sewing and the needle's going, when this arrow faces the ceiling, the needle always ends up in the up position. When I change the indicator so that the arrow is facing downward, then when I stitch and stop, the needle is down in the fabric. How you change it and let the needle release from the fabric is you tap that. Note that the arrow is now pointed towards the ceiling, and now I tap my foot pedal once and the needle is up and I can release. This is important when you're pivoting, doing corners, times where you want the needle in the fabric so that you can turn, do design lines, curves, things like that, where you would want the needle in the fabric when you lift up the presser foot. The next one over is the half speed button. I ask all of you to go in half speed, please. It's just easier, especially if you're a new sewer. If you're a returning student from last year, it's good to put yourself in half speed so that you can get used to sewing again. Once you feel 100% comfortable, you're more than welcome to not be in half speed and go for it. Lastly, the presser foot lever is in the back. I'm going to turn the machine around for a second. It is right here. This is where you lift your foot up and down, and you will need that for all of your stitching. Oh, and I almost forgot. Down here is where the bobbin goes, and you will see that when I do the threading video. This is the bobbin carrier. What this does is it holds the bobbin and it releases the right amount of tension so that when you stitch, everything has nice tension, your stitches aren't loopy, and so on and so forth. Okay, hopefully this was a good review for my seniors, and for the juniors coming into class, watch this video a few times. You will be tested, everybody will be tested on the parts of the machine. I'm going to put together some questions for you for the lesson for your credit, for attendance credit on this video.